Hey, it's Craig Syracusa, and welcome to another episode of Walk in Faith, the show where we go beyond the image and we discover who our guests really are. You might know them from TV, the big screen, or even the world of sports, but do we really know who they are as a person? Do we know what motivates them? Do we know what inspires them? Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Pastor Dimas joins us today to talk about his ministry of serving communities in the wake of tragedy, especially his work in Charleston. We also discuss the new documentary, Emanuel, which tells the story of the Charleston shooting through the eyes of the survivors. Stay tuned and walk with us.
Thank you so much, Dimas, for coming all the way to Brooklyn. You know, I had the opportunity to watch Emanuel. I also read your book. And honestly, first of all, the film was amazing, right? It was sad, but it had such an emotional connection to me that sort of resonated with me after even a couple days after watching it. Yeah. And then, you know, reading your book, I couldn't stop thinking like this is an HBO series or it's like something on Showtime. But in case people aren't familiar with you and the project, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you had an amazing story. And also, how did you get involved in this project?
Yeah, so grew up in Queens, New York. The days of Brooklyn was really tough. And not saying it doesn't have its tough places now, but back in the day, I remember Brooklyn was leading New York in homicide. So I grew up right around the time where the crack boom hit New York City and started seeing kids in junior high school, no exaggeration, purchasing Volvos and $3,000 gold chains. You remember the fat chain era and all of that. And I went to the movies and saw a movie called Scarface and came out of that movie saying, I want to be the biggest drug dealer in New York, and got pulled right into that. And thank God, hit that mark, became one of the largest drug dealers, had contract hits on my life. Many people were trying to kill me, and then 3 women, ordinary women, no big names or anything, they prayed for me and basically did like an exorcism on me. And the evil that was in me, some spirit left out, and before you know it, I felt this peace that I never felt before. And my first prayer to God was, I said, never again. I said, God, I will never sell crack again. I'm just gonna sell marijuana because it's natural. And that was like my crazy prayer to God. I was this religious marijuana dealer until somebody really got a hold of me, and I had to end up giving it all up.
And how old are you at this time?
I started selling drugs at age 11. 11. And my conversion was around 22, 23 years old. It was when I started to walk away from that life.
Oh my God.
I did that for over 12 years.
And during that time, I know you mentioned in the book that, you know, people were sort of planting seeds. I think your sister planted a seed.
Yeah.
You know, people had prophecies over your life. But at the time, did you realize or recognize that that was sort of God and you had this future where you were going to change your life around?
I really did. So I believed in God, but I was one of these people that tried to ignore him like a lot of people do, except for when times got tough. If I got arrested, I would, God, if you get me out of this, Lord, I will follow you. And then I'd get out and be like, I'm good. Let me go back to what I'm doing. So I thought I could fool God like that, but he won in the end.
And you even, like, there's that passage that you say, you know, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Like, it's like you said, during times like we have this connection to faith when things are going right. In your situation, when things were going wrong, you prayed to God. But now, how did you sort of build that relationship with God? And like, is there something that we can do on a daily basis to keep that connection?
So 30 of my friends were killed, and a hitman came to kill me. And I remember I didn't know much. I cracked the Bible open, and I saw a line there that said, O ye of little faith, which is in Matthew chapter 6. And I walked outside. It was my childhood friend that I saw, and he walked me to the side of the house. I realized it was a setup. My worst enemy was there, pulled out a gun, pulled it to my head, pointed at my head, and all I could do at that moment was pray. And I just said, God, you got to get me out of this. And every time he went to pull the trigger, it went snap. And he looked, and they looked at each other, and they clicked it again. They went snap. And they clicked it a third time and pointed at my head. It went snap. And I know by the power of God, no bullets came out of that gun. And then those two knew I was a fighter. So they turned around, they took off running. And at that time, I just said to God, I said, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, if you make it really clear it's your voice, I'll go anywhere. And that's how I ended up in Charleston, South Carolina. That's how I just returned from Sri Lanka, where the 2 Catholic churches were attacked there, 1 Protestant church, and 2 hotels, and flew down there and we met with the United States Embassy out there, and they said, if you go in that area, ISIS is there, you're on your own. Like, we can't cover you there whatsoever. But we follow God, and as Paul says in Philippians 1:21, to live is Christ and to die is gain. So we can't be fearful, And anytime you saw a Catholic minister with a red robe, it always meant that that's a person that was willing to give their life for Christ at a second's notice. So, we all come from a rich Christian history of martyrs, and even the film Emanuel that we'll get into a little bit, we're Christian martyrs. That's from the beginning of our Christian faith, and it's even happening today. So it should be no real surprise to the church.
Wow. But now a couple things. So now, why did God pick you? Like, why? I mean, there are a lot of people that have similar stories that, went down the same path. I mean, you said you had 30 friends that were killed. Why did they die? Why did you live? And how does it make you feel to know that, I mean, this is a huge responsibility. How do you deal with that?
I guess God knew, David committed sins, and God said after his sins, David's a man after God's own heart. So maybe he knew in my heart that when I made the commitment to follow him, nothing has broken that commitment. I don't mess around. I am after God every day. And I feel like, I know what keeps me is also the fear of the Lord. That I feel like if I step out of his grace, I'll be killed. I 100% believe that. We were all doing the same stuff. And I was the only one that turned to Christ, and I'm the only one that's alive. I mean, even my girlfriend's dead, from back then. So we have a bond that I'm not letting anything break that.
Is there something like rituals that you have to do every day, or you just wake up and you are committed? There's times in your life where it's sort of you waver a little?
I'm sitting here with a collar on, so I'm a man of the cloth. I think about Christ every day and how to honor him and what things I can do and how it could be used. So leaving here, I'm flying to, I'll be going into Virginia Beach. They called me to come in because of the mass shooting that happened there. So we're gonna go and help out with people and pray with people and visit victims out there. So this is something that God's called me to do, and I want to do it to the best of my ability.
So how does the average person that didn't sort of have that conversion, that's sort of working towards a relationship with Christ, what could they do? Because it's like in the beginning, right, I have a strong faith, right, but I still have issues fully trusting in God, right? I say I trust in God, but then I'm still playing both sides, right? And you even say you can't live 2 lives, you have to be committed. But how does the average person do that when times get tough, or how do they really trust in God?
I think it's almost like you have to keep readdressing those issues over and over again. I had moments, I think it was in the making of the film, we had to interview this woman when we were making Emanuel. Her name was Felicia Saunders. And she was impossible to reach. I mean, they had an army protecting her. You had to call a lawyer and get through a lawyer. And the lawyer said she doesn't want to be a part of the project. And no. And all this was going on. So I got on my knees in a hotel and I said, God, I said, I have to meet her. I said, Jesus, I'm flying back to New York. Put her on the plane. Put her in the airport. Do something. I'm walking through the airport, and every time I saw a black woman, I was like, I would just look, and I'd be like, it's probably not her. So I got all the way to right before you get on the plane. I sat down, I put down my bag, and when I turned like this black woman went like this and said, are you Felicia? And she looked at me, she said, yes. I said, Felicia Saunders from the Emanuel 9? And she said, yeah. And I said, I've been looking for you. My name is Pastor Dimas. She said, I heard. And I said, wow. I said, you know what? Just give me a second. And I grabbed my cell phone, and we did that reenactment scene of Denmark Vesey running through the woods. I said, I don't know why I'm supposed to show you this. I said, but this is Denmark Vesey. And I said, does this mean anything to you? This is who we cast. She grabbed a book, and she said, I'm reading Denmark Vesey's book. And I turned to her, I said, Felicia, I prayed to meet you in this airport. I said, are you taking this plane to New York? She said, yes. I said, I prayed that you would be on the plane with me. I said, what more does God have to show you that you belong in this movie?
Wow.
And when I got on the plane, I left her alone. I got good sense. I sat in my seat, and I just kneeled my head, and I said, God, forgive me for when I doubt that you can do the impossible. Forgive me when I act like you can't accomplish the task. God just shows up. So that just reminded me to trust him like I used to. I used to trust him like that. I would jump on a plane and fly to China and say, I'm going to go and meet so-and-so, and would land in China and would meet the person. Radical stuff. So I think we got to get out of, well, this is one thing. Get out of your comfort zone. Trust God for bigger and greater things, and watch him show up. Watch him come through, and that builds your faith more and more and more and more. Who could have done that? The story I just told you. That was absolutely God, and that's one of those things that just ignited my faith again. Then I read books about not local people here in the United States. I love people's stories in their books, and mine is a great book, The By Street God. But I also like to read stories of people being persecuted and going through stuff. And then I look at my life, and I'm like, Sri Lanka, this 5-year-old girl gets shot, all sprayed in the back with pellets from the bomb, and she's laying on a mat on a cement floor in a tin hut. And I say, and I'm complaining that I got to pay, some bill or something, when this girl, that's her life. So, yeah.
Oh my God. Not everyone has the ability sort of to hear God's voice and to know, what's God's plan for their life. And you had an issue when you worked at, it was the Department of Health, right?
Yeah.
And, a lot of this is my own struggles, right? Like I hear God's voice, but then I'm like, is that God's voice, or am I, trying to make a deal with God? Or is this something I want to do for my own personal gain or agenda? Like, how do we know when it's really part of God's plan and our own sort of desires?
So there's a few things I do. This is called the permissive will, and there's a sovereign decretive will. And with the permissive will of God, which what's God's plan for our lives, he gives us a lot of liberty, from scripture, from things. Like if I hear a voice that tells me preach on a train, I don't think that's usually the devil. If I want to go and tell someone about Jesus and who he is, I have that freedom, it's open to do that. If I want to go and serve the poor and help, and then I found that in God's sovereign decretive will, he knows how to pause us. This is theological terms, but he knows how to stop us. Where, you ever try to do something, you're just like, it just doesn't feel right, I can't get it going. So God gives us a brain, he gives us a will, he gives us energy and faith that we have the freedom to try stuff for him. And then also I pray God slam any door that's not for me. Like if something's not for me, shut it down, have them reject it, move them out of my life. I don't have time for big mistakes. So I just kind of live like that. And then there's sometimes you just feel this leading. I never heard a voice like, Dimas, yes, Lord, go and help. I've never been like that. But sometimes I feel like, like I told you, I was driving on the highway and I saw your billboard, and out of nowhere, I mean, I see billboards. I said, Walk of Faith. I have to meet that guy. And then here I am sitting in front of you now. How that sign just gripped me. Sports, this, that. I said, whoa, this is going on in New York. That's a guy I need to meet. And then I come here, I'm like, no way. You know,
that's unbelievable.
That was beautiful. That's beautiful.
Unbelievable.
You know? Yeah.
Wow, let's take
You actually look like your picture,
I know. Well,
which
no
most
Photoshop.
people don't look like the picture. You're the man.
Oh my
God.
Yeah. Let's just take a quick break, and then I want to get back to, I want to start talking about the film Emanuel.
Sure.
Be right back with Dimas on Walk in Faith. Welcome back on Walk in Faith. I'm with Dimas. So we briefly went into the documentary Emanuel, but so it was June 17, 2015 when you first heard about the massacre. Where were you? And I know, like, you know, other events like 9/11 you mentioned, but
So,
tell me where you were during that time.
June 17th, I was in my home sleeping. The morning of June 18th is when my wife came running in my room, and she said, name's Tiffany, she said, Dimas, there was a shooting in Charleston at a church, and we need to go. And I've learned when your wife runs in and wakes you up and says, we need to go, we need to go.
Yeah.
So instantly I said, all right, let me call around. I said, let's book flights right now. Let's call our team, because I have a team that does first responding with me. And 3 hours later, we were on a plane going into Charleston. And I had a team with me. We went in front of the church. We saw about 2,000 people, and they were crying and weeping. And I saw a clergy guy, because he had a collar on. I walked over to him and I said, who's going to minister to these people? And he said, you do it, Pastor Dimas. And he's called me by name, which I was shocked. I guess he must have saw me on one of the TV shows that I've been on. So I pull out, I see a bench, and I yanked it to an area where there was a cross in front of the church. And I just started to preach, and I called people to pray. And all the media cameras from around the country lined up and focused on us while we led prayer vigils in front of the church. Then we met family members, and then the family members adopted me as their pastor for that little short period of time when all the media and the funerals and everything. Then I led a march through the park and led a march of 10,000 across the bridge. So Charleston was the only city that didn't burn, you know, around that time. Remember, it was like everywhere was going up in flames and protests. Charleston was the only city where we shut it down, and we told them, we said, this is a church. This is different, you know, and out of nowhere, the families forgave.
I know.
And then that just helped even more. And one guy, I'll never forget, he was with the Ku Klux Klan. He was standing out there. He walked up to me, hugged me, cried on my chest, and he said, I'm quitting the Klan. He said, the words that you shared, that so impacted me, I'm done, and I'm going to tell others to be done.
Was there a specific thing that you said that resonated with him, or was it just the
I
whole
said,
statement?
we're Christian first, we're African American second, we're Christian first, we're white second, we're Christian first, we're Latino second. I said, this whole community has had a loss. I said, the victims have lost, as well as some mother have lost their son for doing this horrible act of violence. I said, whatever the enemy intended behind this attack, let's turn this around for God, and let's all unify as brothers and sisters out here. And people just started locking arms and praying and crying. It was beautiful. It looked like heaven. It was beautiful. And God, I really felt his presence was just on it. when I was out there.
And one thing in the film and in real life, obviously, when you hear about Dylan, how he went into and they welcomed him during that prayer group going on, and he sat there and he listened, and I know he like commented about certain things, like scriptures, and then he waited, and then he opened fire. And I couldn't I'm just sitting there trying to understand how somebody could sit there and do that. And then when you hear about Polly, the woman where he walked over and she was an older lady and said, I'm not going to kill you because I want you to tell the story. Like everything about the story, I can't process it. Like I don't understand it to when he was pulled over and the way they took him out of the car, like as if it was no big deal, like he just got pulled over for a traffic ticket, and then he was joking around and was being interrogated. What causes that, and what's the underlying issue? Like why did he have so much hatred? Like it's a lot of questions, but I don't understand how somebody could do that.
So I've been around a lot of killers in my life, and I believe it is spiritual. I believe it's evil. I believe Satan gets a grip on them. Do you remember when Polly said his eyes were like black pools? Do you know in the Rwanda attacks, when the people were slaughtering people in Rwanda, they reported the same thing. It was like they were in a trance and their eyes were black. When the Japanese were doing suicide bombs, there were same reports of the eyes being like that. So when Miss Polly said that, I said, whoa. I said, listen to that, because I've heard about that before. So there's something that's very evil and very demonic that I believe had a grip on him. And the meaning, that's why he could laugh and joke,
no remorse,
it just,
no compassion.
It was like eating ice cream.
Yeah.
And
it was the next day when he got pulled over. And to sit there and I'm saying, isn't this something that, I would have hoped that there was something that they said during that Bible study that would have sort of connected and clicked. But like you said, he must have been overcome by something powerful.
He did say that he thought about not doing it. When Myra Thompson was preaching, it was her first time preaching. And she was preaching the Bible study on how the sower sows the seed. And he said, when he heard that, he was like, wow. I don't know if he was wondering, was he good ground or bad soil? Or, that's what the text is talking about. And unfortunately, it turned out he was bad soil. And he thought that it would be constructive for his cause to, murder African Americans in a Bible study. But he picked the wrong place to start a war. He picked church. It only unified the city as opposed to causing separation.
That message, about forgiveness, I mean, I know there was riots going on, and when the film, there was someone that said, how could we continue to riot when they forgave him? And it was so powerful to see that. I mean, you just, I don't even know how I would react. Like, God forbid you were in a situation like that, would you be able to, in front of the courtroom, forgive him and say, repent? I mean, that's difficult.
When you fully understand the courtroom scene, the woman Nadine, they said they thought she was gonna hurl invectives at Dylan Roof and attack him, because that was she has a strong personality. But people said they felt a wave of God's presence into that courtroom. And like Nadine explained, it was like, this is not the time. This is the time to be led by me. And those words of forgiveness were spoken, and all of them said the hatred that they felt in their heart was instantly gone and has never returned. I mean, when you get further into it, I wish we could have told a 3-hour story.
I would have watched it.
There's so many miracles.
I would have watched it.
But the film Emanuel, airs June 17th and 19th, but we have to condense it, down to an hour and 15 minutes because, people can't watch things long anymore.
Oh, that's the running time, people.
That's the running time, hour and 15 minutes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's a great documentary. And we touched on something. Years ago, I worked on, it was during Columbine, right? I had some of the victims' family come. It was the same interesting story, and we did this whole panel, and that was a big story, right?
Absolutely.
But since then, from now, it's like we've become desensitized. Like there was a shooting last week, in Virginia, and there's one every couple of months, and society sort of just says, okay, it doesn't affect me, or it does, and we just move on. Like it happens a lot more beyond gun control. What could we do as Christians? What could we say to the kids? Like what could we do? Like if you would have the opportunity to sit down with Dylan before it happened, or even now, what would you say to him? Like, how can we prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, I want to address the first thing. What's real important is first, we have to love and care. So when the shooting happened in Jewish synagogue, I drove down to Pittsburgh. When the killings happened in Sri Lanka, I flew down to Sri Lanka. Shootings just happened in Virginia Beach. I'm going out to meet victims. You can't let this become our norm. We still have to love passionately and care. And I think, if I had the chance to speak or minister to Dylan Roof, I would have gladly loved to walk him through this whole hate narrative and point to him that African Americans have served this country. We were brought here in ships. We are not the enemy. And if you see some progress of an African American president, that should be in more ways celebrated, that other people are having a chance who didn't voluntarily come here to experience some of the benefits of living in this great country.
Amazing. Okay, we want to advise people, obviously, to see the film. And you have a big producing cast, Stephen Curry.
Stephen Curry's a part of it, Viola Davis, Mariska Hargitay from Law & Order, the director, Brian Ivey, award-winning director. There was no shortcuts on this movie. It is going to be one of the most beautiful films. And though it's a dark story, when you see the power and the love that the families give to this misguided young man, hope just rises in your heart. And it helps people to forgive those that they've held grudges against as well.
And how can people get in contact with you? Do you have a website or anything? Any information?
Emanuelmovie.com. They can go to emanuelmovie.com, or they can go to the dynamiclife.com if they want to see stuff that I do. It's the dynamiclife.com.
Thank you so much. God bless you. It was wonderful speaking with you. Thank you.
Man.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through your words and actions. Till next time.